Okay, we'll wrap up installment loans today by discussing open-end installment loans. Very good example of this is a credit card account. So we're going to look at a few examples dealing with credit cards and minimum payments and how they might figure out your interest, your finance charge, those kinds of things. So these are good examples because variable payments may be made each month. So it's an installment loan, but it's you're not like the previous video. You had steady payments, same thing each month. Credit card, not necessarily. All right, so let's jump right into an example that I wanted to go over. There's a credit card company that determines the minimum monthly payment by adding all new interest to 2% of the outstanding principal. So the minimum monthly payment so add all new interest to 2% of outstanding principal. The interest rate is 0.04238% per day. So this is a daily rate. The person that has this credit card, they used it on September 15th to purchase something for $3,200. No other purchases during the month of September. So assuming there's no new interest, what is the minimum payment due on October 1st? Often with credit cards, whatever charges you had in that previous month, that recent month, they won't start accruing interest yet. But if you don't pay them off, then the following month it starts accruing interest. So that's what's happening here. Now, not all credit cards are the same. You got to read your terms and conditions and be aware of those. Some will start charging interest as soon as you make a purchase, but it just depends on the card. But this one, they don't. They don't immediately. They wait till the following month to worry about it. But we're trying to figure out what the minimum payment will be. So even if she doesn't want to pay it off, what is the minimum they're going to ask her to pay so that she can avoid any fees or dings to her credit report. So since it's 2% of the outstanding principal, well, the principal at this point is still considered to be the $3,200. So it's going to be $3,200 times 0.02. And that's $64. So that's going to be the minimum payment due. She needs to at least pay that to stay in good standing with her credit card, not suddenly lose any introductory interest rates, and not have any dings to her credit report. She needs to at least pay that. Problem is, though, that's not going to pay off her balance. So even though she doesn't have interest accruing just yet, this next month in October, she will. All right, so on October 1st, payment was made, but she paid a bigger payment than $64. Payment made of $1,200 on October 1st. So assuming there's nothing additional, no additional charges, cash advances, etc., what is the minimum payment due November 1st? Well, we need to subtract the $1,200 payment from that principal. So during the month of October up through November 1st, a balance of $2,000 was being carried. So to get the minimum payment, we need to have 2% of the $2,000. And that's $40. But that's not all. Like the previous month, that's all we had to do because we didn't have any interest accruing. But now there's interest accruing during the month of October. So we got to add that in. And the interest is really just simple interest. But you have to make sure the rate and time are consistent with each other. So you're doing PRT. So in this case, the P is the $2,000. That was the balance carried through the month. And we're talking about the month of September. Or October, excuse me. Sorry, because we're looking at November 1st. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except February, which has 28, and a leap year has 29. So for the month of October, we're looking at 31 days. And then we can use the daily interest rate. Remember, the daily interest rate was 0.04238%. And then to put that in decimal format, we move the decimal 2 places to the left. So we'd have to use 0.0004238 in our computation. And when we do that, we get $26.28. So the $40, which was that 2% of the principal carried across that time period, plus the $26.28 for the interest, means that the minimum payment is going to be $66.28, but they usually round it, so they're going to round it up and say $67. So that would be the minimum payment due. I would hope she'd be able to try to pay it off, pay more than that, to avoid paying too much more in interest. Okay. Now, not all credit cards compute the interest the same way, because you're going to have, things are going to change through the month. You might make more charges, you might make some partial payments, you might do cash advances, things change. Some credit card companies only charge interest on the previous balance from the previous charge period. This finance charge is added to the previous balance, and then the new month's charges and payments are factored in to see what your final balance is for the end of that month. All right. For an example, on September 5th, there is a card that has a balance due of $567.20. Okay. But the person who has this card on September 8th makes a $275 payment. Then on September 21st, has a $330 charge. September 27th, these are all going to be charges. And October 2nd, there's going to be charges too. So I'm just going to write it like this. It's being a little lazy. All right, so September 27th, it's $190.80. And then October 2nd, it's $84.75. So we want to find the finance charge on October 5th using this previous balance method. The interest rate is 1.1% per month. So we can just use simple interest for 1 month. the previous balance, $567.20, times the interest rate as a decimal, so 0.011. So remember, you for change percent to a decimal, move the decimal 2 places to the left, and then it's only for 1 month, so time is 1. So you multiply all that together, and you get a finance charge of $6.24. So they're just based on whatever that previous balance was coming into this month. As your principal times your month, in this case, a monthly rate times your time in months. If you'd used a daily rate, then you would have to have your time in days. As long as your rate and your time are consistent with the units. Next question asked, though, is not just how much interest is going to be charged, but what's the new balance on October 5th? Well, the $567.20 was the previous balance. And you add in the finance charge, because that's going to be now part of the total owed. And then you make all your adjustments based on what happened that month. You subtract the $275 payment. I listed all these things earlier. Because on a credit card balance, you subtract payments and add in charges. There was you add in the $330 charge, add in the $190.80 charge, and then add in the $84.75 charge. And when you do that, you get a grand total of $903.99. So as of October 5th, that credit card has a balance of $903.99. So that's another way of that's a way of figuring out your balance. So you're gonna have to read your terms and conditions to see, do they use the previous balance method or not? They might not use that. It depends, but it should say in the print on your credit card statement. Or on the website, or wherever you get your information about your credit card. Now, they don't all use previous balance method. Some of them use the average daily balance. To figure out average daily balance, you take each day's balance that month and you add it up and divide by the number of days. Or as a shortcut, like if you had the same balance for 5 days, you can just multiply that balance times 5. And then another balance for 8 days, you can multiply that balance times 8. And add them all up and divide by how many days there are. And that's finding the average daily balance. It's like finding a test average. You add up your test grades and divide by how many tests you have. Well, in this case, you add up your balances for each day, divide by how many days you have. And then use simple interest. And the simple interest formula, whatever that average daily balance is the P. R and T, you just have to look at your credit card information for the R, and then just for that month, your T. If R is monthly, T is usually going to be 1, because usually you're looking at 1 month. If R is daily, then T is the number of days in that month. If you don't know your daily rate, if you're trying to do things with the daily rate, interest rate, you can take the annual rate and divide by the number of days in a year. Like divide by 360. Or if your credit card uses 365, again, look at the fine print. And that'll give you the daily rate if you want it. So like if you have a 3% APR, annual percentage rate, divide by, like, if it's using 360, divide by 360, that'll tell you the percentage rate, the daily percentage rate. Okay, so let's look at an example of that. All right, there's a balance of $1,578.25 due on March 3rd, or 23rd, excuse me. Period ends April 23rd. On March 26th, there's a $79.98 charge. So So it's been 3 days since the balance due of March 23rd to March 26th. That's been 3 days. Then March 30th, so 4 days later, there is a charge of $52.76. On April 3rd, so 4 days after that, there is a payment of $250. On April 15th, so that's 12 days later. From there, there is a charge of $190.52. And then on April 22nd, that was 7 days later, there's a charge of $190.85. And that's all the activity through the period ending on April 23rd. So we have to look at what is the balance as we move forward and figure out our average. Well, from April 23rd, or from March 23rd through until that charge on March 26th, the balance is still $1,578.25. But as soon as March 26th hits, you have that charge of $79.98. So now the balance is $1,658.23. Then when March 30th hits, 4 days later, there's a charge of $52.76. So now the balance is $1710.99. Then when the payment is made on April 3rd for $250, the balance comes down to $1460.99. Then on April 15th, you have the $190.52 charge, so you have a balance of $1651.51. Then on April 22nd, you have the $190.85 charge, so now your balance is $1842.36, and that's carried for one more day through the end of the period. So we need to use those balances, the number of days they're carried, and find the averages. Find the average. So over that 31 days in that period, what was the average balance each day? Average don't necessarily be the same as any of those numbers, but it's kind of like a test average. Your test average isn't the same, but you add them up and divide by how many tests there were. All right, so starting out again, it was 1578.25, and we carried that for 3 days. Then it was the 1658.23. We carried that for 4 days. Then it was the 1710.99, and we carried that for 4 days. And it was the 1460.99. Carried that for 12 days. The 1651.51. Carried that for 7 days. And the 1842.36 only carried that for 1 day. And that's 31 days, so divide by 31. And you'll see what your average daily balance is. So you want to do like those multiplications in the parentheses, do those, then add up the results, and then divide that whole number by 31. The whole order of operations thing here. Or if you have a graphing calculator, you can type, or some scientific calculators, you can type in parentheses. So you could always use parentheses and do the top, figure out what your answer is, and then divide by 31. All right, so when I did that, my top number came out to $49,146.44, and then divide by those 31 days, and I got $1,585.37. So this was my average daily balance. So finance charge, April 23rd at 1.3% monthly. PRT. So I use my 1585.37. Oops. I was thinking ahead to the 8 and started writing that. 1585.37 times the, since we're doing it monthly, so I'll use 0.013 times 1 month. And then that is $20.61. So that's the finance charge. So what is the balance due? On April 23rd. But you guys see whatever that balance was back here, and then add that with your finance charge. At that point, they're going to be like, okay, so at this point, with all your charges and payments and everything, you're at $1,842.36. But we're going to add in your finance charge, and you owe us that too. So you're going to add in the $20.61 finance charge. And you get a grand total of $1,862.97. It's crazy how fast these finance charges can start getting away from you. Especially if your interest, that's a really decent interest rate, 1.3% monthly. That's not going to be too devastating. But if it's higher than that, you could be in some trouble. A lot of cards will get you in there with this great rate of 0% introductory, but then you don't realize that they can shoot up. As soon as that introductory rate's over, they can shoot up to as much as 40% annually. It can get really bad. So you just have to be careful. One other type of problem for a credit card, you might do a cash advance on a credit card. Again, be careful with this kind of thing. Some of them have these nice deals where it's 0% cash advance as long as you pay it off by this date. But if you don't pay it off by that date, all of a sudden all the interest that could have accrued is on there. Actually, I have a Care credit card right now like that where I had to get some major dental work done. So I have 0% for 18 months. And I'm paying it off. I'm not too worried about it. It'll be paid off well before then. But if I don't pay it off at the end of 18 months, even if I only owe them like $1, suddenly they're going to add on 18 months worth of interest. So you have to be careful with that kind of thing. Don't set something like that up unless you know you're capable of paying it off. All right, done with the little lecture. Let's look at a cash advance. Cash advances, you use simple interest again. Just make sure your rate and time are in the same units. And upon repayment, the total you owe is the sum of not only the cash advance, but whatever the interest was charged. So it's a type of loan you're just putting on a credit card. You're going to find, though, that oftentimes it's cheaper to go get an installment loan rather than to do a cash advance loan. Usually cash advance loans have higher interest rates than installment loans. And like installment loans, you pay them off early. Sometimes you benefit more with the savings and interest. It all depends on how the cash advance wording is. Again, too, if you're ever going to do that loan, make sure you're allowed to pay it off early and not penalized. Make sure also that paying it off early doesn't mean you have to still pay all the interest. So those are little things to look at in your fine print. Okay, so let's do an example of a cash advance. Somebody takes out a $600 advance from their credit card. They needed the cash. They got it off their credit card at a daily rate of 0.05477%. Repays in 27 days. Okay, so it wasn't too long. So let's figure out first how much interest is charged for that. So use I equals PRT. The $600 is the principal. That's the cash advance. Since the rate is in days and the repayment time is in days, we can just use what we've got there. So we rewrite that percent in its decimal form by moving the decimal 2 places to the left. So 0.0005477. I have to be extra careful of my zeros there. It's so easy to trip up and use not enough or too many. All right, so then you multiply all that and you get $8.87. So that's the interest being charged on this little cash advance. So the person has to repay the $600 advance plus the $8.87 finance charge. So $608.87. So that's the basics of how a cash advance might work. All right, I think that summarizes a lot of the major credit card loans. Some of them get a little more complicated. I'm not going to get into that, but these are probably your most common things you can see. Again, read your fine print to be fully aware of all your rates and how they're applied. And check your statements on a regular basis because, places make mistakes and you want to get that remedied as fast as possible. Also, with your credit cards, if you keep tabs on your statements on a regular basis, you can catch whether there's fraud occurring. Because some cards can find fraud pretty quickly, but not always. So you always want to be checking and making sure everything adds up correctly from what you're seeing. A couple other types of loan options there are out there. I like to just briefly mention these. Besides these simple interest and amortized type loans that we've been talking about, there's other kinds of options. One of them that's pretty popular is rent to own. I've had students in the past talk about doing that, like Rent-A-Center or those kinds of places. The interest they charge, though, when you start looking at how much you're paying to rent it, rent payment basically has interest in it. Like by the time you finish doing the rent to own, usually you've paid enough that you could have just purchased like 3 or 4 of the item on your own. So unless you have like this extreme emergency situation with the rent to own, it is far better just go and save up the cash and pay cash for something. Like one of my former students talked about renting to own furniture, including a couch. I am personally not willing to pay like 5 times the amount I should pay for a couch. And you don't, and apparently too, they tend to, whatever people turn back in or gets, put back in their possession, they'll rent out to somebody else. So somebody had rented a couch and then the same exact couch ended up in their friend's house. Ew. Anyways, just be aware of that you're not necessarily getting brand new stuff either. But you could, the advantages, like you can choose to turn in the item at any time or pay to the end of the time to purchase. That might be a good thing for like if you're in a theater program and you need props. Hey, don't want to go buy a couch. Let's just rent one to use during the play and then return it when we're done. I could see that. But if you need something for your home, some people, I guess, with real estate, if they're staging a home, they might do something like this where they just need to put some furniture in there temporarily. Willing to pay that cost for like a month or 2 while they're trying to sell a house. But if it's for your personal use, if you can, save up the money and pay cash. When we moved down here, we didn't have a couch. And we did just that. Like we actually sat on lawn chairs in the living room until we could pay for a couch because I wasn't doing the rent to own thing. Another option is the pawn loan. The customer receives a loan for a percentage of the value of an item. I have pawned things off myself when nobody else would buy it and I was desperate. I didn't intend to go back and get the item again. So the shop took the item. I was in Winter Haven there. The shop took the item and gave me a payment. And then after that, they had it. And if I didn't go back in a certain amount of time to try to buy it back, they could sell it to somebody else. It's considered a loan because you get the amount you give is a percentage of the value that they perceive the item to be. And you can always go back and get the item back after you pay off the loan plus interest. But I didn't choose to do that. I didn't want the item back. So basically I defaulted. I didn't go back and pay off the loan. So then they sold the item. So it's an interesting kind of a setup, especially if you're trying to sell something that maybe other people aren't going to buy from you, but pawn shop might have some value to it. It seems like jewelry, musical instruments, stuff like that, common items there. All right, I've probably rambled on enough about this. Thank you for joining me today. Right now, you have one more financial math unit. Has to deal with homes and mortgages, and then that'll wrap up this semester what we're doing right now with financial math. So thank you again for joining me, and I look forward to seeing all your discussion posts and project submissions soon. Have a great day.